My name is Diane Whitmore. I'm 58, and I've never been the type to raise my voice. I was raised to be agreeable, to be thankful for what I had, and never, ever to ask for more than what was offered. But life has a cruel way of showing you just how little that kind of quiet dignity is worth when the people around you are selfish to the core. It started at my sister-in-law's engagement dinner. Her name is Mallory, blonde, tall, and the kind of woman who walks into a room and immediately demands attention, without saying a word. My brother-in-law, Nathan, had been dating her for just over 2 years. He was proud of her, obsessed even, and from the very beginning, she made it clear I wasn't her kind of people. "Your dress is so practical," she said that evening, her smile tight, her eyes flickering with amusement. I smiled back and said nothing. That was my role in the family: silent approval, endless patience. My husband Gary sat beside me, laughing with Nathan about the custom cigar bar they wanted at the wedding. "It's going to be classy," Nathan said, puffing his chest like a kid showing off a trophy. "No expenses spared." That phrase, "no expenses spared," would haunt me later. At the time, I was just trying to get through the night. Our son, Evan, had been sick again that morning. Another fever, the third one in 2 weeks. I had a pit in my stomach, but Gary told me not to worry. "It's probably just a bug," he said. "Don't ruin the night, Diane." I didn't ruin it. I never ruin anything. The wedding plans took over every conversation after that. Gary's parents, who'd never shown much interest in Evan's school recitals or birthdays, suddenly had opinions on linen colors and signature cocktails. His mother actually cried when the venue changed to somewhere with less floral ambiance. Meanwhile, I was in and out of clinics with Evan, tests, blood work. Then, one cold Tuesday morning, the doctor sat me down and used words I wasn't ready to hear. Acute lymphoblastic leukemia. The words didn't even register. I just nodded like I always did. Quiet, agreeable. I told Gary that night. He was stunned. He held me. He said all the right things. But I could see it in his eyes. He was already calculating the cost. The treatment wasn't going to be cheap. The insurance would cover some, but not all. We'd need help. A lot of help. Gary said he'd talk to his family. I should have known better. Gary didn't bring it up at first. Days passed, then a week. I assumed he was waiting for the right moment. But then I caught him one evening, sitting on the edge of the bed, looking over spreadsheets on his laptop. Our savings, his retirement account, the numbers weren't adding up. "I thought you were going to talk to them," I said gently. He closed the screen. "I'm trying to figure out a way to do this ourselves." "Gary," I whispered, "we can't." He sighed like I was being dramatic. "It's just not the right time. With the wedding coming up." "The wedding? I'm not saying they won't help. I'm just saying, maybe later, after everything settles down." I went silent. It was my default. I could have screamed, but what would that solve? Gary didn't like raised voices. He grew up in a house where everything was smoothed over with fake smiles and expensive wine. He had learned to never make anyone uncomfortable, even if it meant letting your own wife break quietly in the corner. The next week, I made the call myself. It was a Tuesday, late afternoon. I sat in my car outside Evan's pediatric oncology clinic, watching the sun slant across the dashboard as the phone rang. Gary's mother answered. "Beverly." Always formal, always in control. I told her about Evan, about the diagnosis. I kept my voice steady. When I mentioned the cost, she exhaled. "Oh, Diane, that's terrible." I waited, hoped. She didn't say anything more. "I hate to ask," I continued, "but we're really struggling. There's a treatment program in Boston. It could make all the difference. But we'd need to start as soon as possible. The deposit alone is—" "I see," she interrupted. That's unfortunate timing." Timing. That word buzzed in my ears like a mosquito I couldn't slap away. We just paid the balance on Nathan's venue, she went on. Mallory insisted on the vineyard property, and the caterer charges double for seasonal ingredients, but it's her dream menu, so we're already stretched quite thin. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. Perhaps you could look into some kind of fundraiser. There are websites for that now. My face went hot. My palms trembled on the steering wheel. Of course, we'll be praying, she added cheerfully, like that was currency. I hung up before I said something I couldn't take back. When I picked Evan up, he smiled, despite the hospital bandage on his arm. I drew you a giraffe, he said proudly. It's got glasses, like you. I held the drawing to my chest and cried in the parking lot while he quietly hummed in the back seat. I sat at the kitchen table that night, long after Gary went to bed, staring at the blinking cursor on a crowdfunding website. I'd never asked for anything from anyone before. Not like this. Not publicly. Not with pictures and paragraphs explaining why my little boy deserved a chance at life. But the Boston program wouldn't wait. The deposit was due in 3 weeks. I wrote the campaign description carefully. I didn't dramatize. I didn't beg. I just told the truth. Evan was 6. He loved giraffes and peanut butter toast and building Lego castles. He had leukemia. He needed help. I posted it around midnight. By the next morning, it had $27. Gary saw it over breakfast. He stared at his phone, then at me. You posted this? I nodded. You didn't even talk to me about it. You said we couldn't ask your family, I said calmly. So I'm asking everyone else. He didn't reply. Just stood, put his mug in the sink, and left for work without kissing Evan on the head like he usually did. The days blurred. Every moment felt like a quiet race against time. I dropped Evan off at appointments. I worked double shifts at the library. I came home, checked the fundraiser, answered strangers' questions, begged for shares. By the end of the first week, we had a little over $1,000. That weekend, I went to the bridal shower. I didn't want to go, but Mallory sent a handwritten invitation, and Gary said it would be worse not to show up, so I went. I curled my hair, put on lipstick, and wore a blouse that didn't wrinkle when I cried. Mallory beamed as she opened gifts, crystal pitchers, Italian cookware, designer towels. The room clapped, oohed, and aid like we were watching royalty unwrap gifts meant for peasants. I sat in the back, smiling through it all, until someone asked how Evan was doing. I told them. There was an awkward pause. One woman, I think her name was Claire, said, "That must be so hard. At least he's young, right?" They bounced back. Then Mallory, without missing a beat, laughed and said, "Well, we all have our trials. Evan's sick, and I've had 3 dress fittings and still haven't found one that hides my hips." The room laughed with her, and I sat there, silent, burning. Later that evening, while Mallory drank wine and posted selfies with her diamond engagement ring, angled just right, I sat alone in my car and wrote an update on the fundraiser page. I didn't say what happened at the shower. I didn't even mention the wedding. I just posted a photo of Evan asleep in the back seat, clutching his giraffe drawing with the glasses. "He's fighting," I wrote, "every single day, and he deserves to win." That post tripled the donations by morning. People I'd never met were giving $10, $20, $50. Strangers had more compassion than the people I shared holiday dinners with. I started to feel something I hadn't felt in weeks. Anger. By the end of the second week, the fundraiser had passed $5,000. We were still far from the amount we needed, but there was momentum. Messages poured in from strangers, mothers, teachers, people who'd been through similar battles. Some just said they were praying. Some sent money and refused to leave their names. And yet, Gary still hadn't shared the fundraiser once. Not on his social media, not with his coworkers, not with friends. When I asked him why, he shrugged. I don't think airing our personal life online is the best idea. I stared at him across the dinner table. It's not airing anything. It's saving Evan's life. He didn't reply. That night, I slept on the couch. Not out of spite, because I couldn't stand the feeling of his body beside mine, so still and cold, while I lay awake, wondering how many more days Evan had before his condition worsened. 3 mornings later, I found the wedding invitation in the mail. Thick cardstock, gold lettering, wax seal. It must have cost more than our last 3 months of groceries combined. The ceremony was going to be held at a private vineyard upstate. There was a schedule for cocktail hour, sunset vows, and a late-night oyster bar. I wanted to rip the thing in half. Instead, I folded it neatly and put it in a drawer. That was the day I stopped pretending we were one family. When I picked Evan up from the clinic, his nurse, Danielle, pulled me aside. "He's holding up really well," she said kindly. "But the doctor wants to start the Boston protocol next month. That timeline is firm." "I know," I whispered. "You've got about 3 weeks left to get the deposit in. Just over 25,000. I nodded. My legs felt hollow. I went home and started selling things. I sold my wedding china, the crystal vase from our anniversary, my grandmother's brooch. Every item carried a memory, but I didn't care anymore. I was done holding onto the past while the present crumbled around me. When Beverly called to ask if I could make the seating chart for the rehearsal dinner, I almost laughed. "I'm a little busy trying to keep your grandson alive," I said flatly. There was a pause, then a tight little hum of disapproval. "There's no need to be harsh, Diane." "There's no need for an oyster bar either," I replied, and hung up. That was the moment something shifted inside me. I had been quiet for so long, afraid to upset people who thought their comfort was more sacred than my son's life. But not anymore. The next day, I recorded a video for the fundraiser page. No makeup, no script. Just me in the kitchen with a mug of coffee and a stack of medical bills. I told the truth. About the diagnosis. About the costs. About the silence from the people who should have helped first. I didn't name names. I didn't need to. The rawness in my voice said enough. By that evening, the video had gone semi-viral. $12,000 came in overnight. I told Evan we were going to Boston. And for the first time in weeks, he smiled like a little boy again. Not a patient. The flight to Boston was paid for by a woman named Jeanette from Montana. She messaged me privately after watching the video. Said she lost her nephew to the same cancer. She sent a handwritten card with a check inside. The card read, "Use it to get him there and get him better." Evan clutched that card like it was a golden ticket. He kept asking if we'd see snow in Boston. I told him we just might. Gary didn't come. He said he couldn't take time off, said it would jeopardize things at work. But I knew the truth. He didn't want to be there, not really. He hated hospitals, hated the waiting rooms, the antiseptic smell, the fluorescent lights. He hated seeing Evan so small in that hospital bed. What he hated more was how I had changed. I was no longer soft around the edges. I didn't whisper anymore. Boston was cold, sharp wind, gray skies. But the doctors were warm. They had a plan, a schedule, a protocol. Danielle, the nurse from back home, had called ahead and made sure everything was lined up. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was begging the universe for scraps. I felt like we were doing something. Evan responded well to the first week. The nausea came fast, and the fatigue hit harder than either of us expected, but he never once complained. "Do the giraffes get chemo too?" he asked me, drowsy in his bed. "I bet they do," I said, "and they're just as brave." We stayed in a temporary housing facility for families, clean, quiet, and full of other mothers who had memorized the sounds of beeping machines and learned how to smile with tired eyes. I met a woman named Trina, who brought me tea every morning. She told me her son had been fighting leukemia for over a year. There will be good days, she said, and days that feel like drowning. On both, just keep going. Back home, the wedding was approaching. I saw photos on social media. Mallory in a white dress that looked like it cost more than our car. Nathan holding a champagne flute in a room dripping with gold and orchids. Gary was in the photos, smiling, holding a drink, wearing a new suit. He hadn't even told me he was going. He hadn't called to check on Evan once since we arrived. I stared at the photo for a long time. Then I zoomed in, not on Mallory's dress or Nathan's smug smile, but on Gary's hand. He wasn't wearing his wedding ring. That night, I lay in the cot beside Evan's bed and cried for everything I didn't say. All the moments I stayed small so other people could feel tall. The years I spent managing everyone else's comfort while ignoring my own sorrow. But the crying didn't last long. I dried my face, kissed Evan's hand, and pulled out my notebook. I started making a new plan, one that didn't include asking permission to survive. The first phase of treatment lasted 6 weeks. I marked the days on a small paper calendar with giraffe stickers. Evan liked to count them. "Only 12 giraffes left, Mom," he'd say, trying to sound excited even when he was too tired to sit up. Each day, we found small ways to survive. We told stories. We painted rocks. He gave each of the nurses nicknames based on their smiles. There was a rhythm to it, even in the pain, a kind of quiet bravery that made everything else fade. Gary didn't visit, not once. He sent a text once a week. Short things. "How's he doing? Let me know if you need anything." I stopped replying, not out of bitterness, but because the silence between us had stopped hurting. It had become expected. What I hadn't expected was the email from Beverly. Subject line: "Rehearsal dinner photos. Thought you'd enjoy." No greeting, no inquiry about Evan. Just a slideshow of Mallory posing beside a champagne tower. Nathan with lobster tails. Beverly giving a toast in a glittering navy gown. And at the very end, a photo of Gary, standing beside Mallory, his hand resting lightly on her lower back. I stared at it for a long time. Not because I was shocked. I wasn't. I was simply done pretending I didn't see what was there. The next morning, I called Gary. "I'm filing for separation," I said. My voice didn't shake. There was silence. Then, "Now? Really?" "Yes, now." "You're emotional." "No," I cut him off. "I've been quiet. That's not the same thing." He tried to shift the blame, said I'd made him feel like a stranger, that the fundraiser had embarrassed him, that he didn't like the way people whispered about our family. "They weren't whispering because of me," I replied. "They were whispering because of what you didn't do." I didn't cry. I didn't even flinch. I booked a lawyer that afternoon. Nothing fancy. Just a woman named Carla who met me in the coffee shop across from the hospital. I told her everything. She didn't interrupt once. When I finished, she only asked one thing. "What do you want?" It was the first time anyone had asked me that in years. "I want peace," I said, "and to never owe that family anything again." "Then that's where we'll start," she nodded. Back in the hospital, Evan was asleep, a coloring book still open on his lap. I sat beside him and brushed his hair gently from his forehead. "I'm going to build you a different life," I whispered. "One where we don't have to beg anyone to care about you." And for the first time in years, I meant every word I said. Gary didn't take the separation well. He didn't scream, didn't plead, just simmered. That quiet kind of bitterness that festers under a man's pride. He sent me clipped texts about dividing assets and, "Think about what this does to Evan," as if Evan hadn't already watched him vanish without a backward glance. Then Beverly called. "Diane," she said, her voice clipped and falsely sweet, "this isn't like you." "Maybe you never knew me," I replied. There was a pause. "You're being emotional." No, Beverly, I'm being finished. She exhaled like I'd disappointed her personally. You realize, of course, that this affects all of us. You've put Gary in a terrible position. He put himself there. Well, she said stiffly, this family has always valued discretion. I don't think the fundraiser or the separation reflect that. I laughed. I couldn't help it. You think discretion is a value? I think it's cowardice dressed up in pearls. She hung up on me. 2 days later, Mallory messaged me. It was a single line. I hope this drama isn't going to get in the way of Evan's treatment. I stared at the screen, stunned, as if my decision to leave a cold, unfaithful husband was equivalent to her fretting over caterers. I didn't reply. I blocked her. Evan, meanwhile, kept fighting. He lost his hair. He started wearing a knitted giraffe beanie I bought him from the hospital gift shop. On good days, he asked about going back to school. On bad days, he just wanted to listen to music and have me hold his hand. Carla helped fast-track the separation. Since there were no shared properties and Evan was legally my dependent, we didn't need a courtroom, just signatures. Gary delayed, canceled appointments, claimed he was reconsidering everything. But I wasn't. I mailed the final paperwork myself. Then something strange happened. The fundraiser page, which had gone quiet for a few weeks, began getting attention again. Messages, shares, donations, small but steady. I didn't understand why, until I learned that someone had written a blog post about Evan's story. It wasn't just about leukemia. It was about a mother abandoned by the people who were supposed to help her, a mother who stood up anyway. The story struck a nerve. People started commenting, "You're stronger than you know." This made me cry. I hope she knows she's not alone. For the first time, I didn't feel alone. Then came the letter, folded, handwritten, left in the mailbox of the housing unit we were staying in. It was from Gary. "I want to fix things," it read. "Come home. We can try again. For Evan." I read it twice, 3 times. Then I folded it, placed it in the trash, and sat beside Evan while he slept. "Home is wherever you are," I whispered. We finished the last round of the Boston Protocol on a Thursday. Evan rang the bell in the pediatric ward, while the nurses clapped and blew bubbles. He was thinner, quieter, and more tired than I'd ever seen him. But his smile that day, it was real. It wasn't brave or mom kind of happy. It was I'm still here and I know it happy. I cried in the hallway afterward. Not because I was sad, but because I hadn't let myself cry like that in months. Not since the diagnosis. Not since the fundraising. Not since packing the suitcase alone and flying to Boston on borrowed prayers. Evan would still need monitoring. He'd need regular visits and blood work. But for now, for this moment, we had cleared the highest hurdle. We returned home 2 weeks later. Not to the house I had left behind, but to a modest 2-bedroom apartment on the other side of town. Carla had helped me file for financial separation before the divorce finalized. Evan's room had light blue walls, a soft rug, and shelves filled with giraffes people had sent from across the country. We weren't rich, but we were safe. Gary never showed up, not when we landed, not when Evan was discharged, not even when the fundraiser passed its final goal, and I sent out personal thank you notes to every donor, just so they'd know their kindness wasn't forgotten. But Gary did call, once. I let it go to voicemail. He didn't ask how Evan was. He asked about taxes. That said everything. One afternoon, I ran into Mallory and Nathan at a grocery store. They were arguing about wine, something about the wrong label or the wrong vintage. I tried to avoid them, but Nathan spotted me and smiled like we were old friends. "Diane! Wow! You look different." Mallory eyed me up and down. "You lost weight." I smiled. "Stress will do that." Nathan gestured vaguely. "Hey, Gary mentioned something about you two being separated." "We are." Mallory cocked her head. Are you sure that's wise? I mean, Evan needs a father figure, doesn't he? I stared at her. He needs someone who doesn't vanish when it gets hard. Mallory's smile flickered, just for a second. Then she changed the subject. We're starting a real estate business, luxury properties. Maybe one day you'll work for us. I didn't answer. I just pushed my card away and said, one day, maybe you'll understand what it means to earn something. That night, Evan and I made pancakes for dinner. He was wearing his giraffe hat again and insisted on pouring the syrup himself. Half of it ended up on the floor. I didn't care. I laughed. He laughed harder. After he fell asleep, I sat on the balcony and opened a letter from Carla. The divorce would be finalized in 30 days. I didn't feel broken. I didn't feel defeated. I felt ready, ready to tell the truth to whoever asked. Ready to say, they let us drown, and we learned how to swim anyway. I didn't expect the knock at my door. It was late afternoon. Evan was at a follow-up appointment with a friend from the hospital driving him home, and I was folding laundry in the living room when I heard it. 3 short raps, too familiar in rhythm. When I opened it, Beverly stood there. She wore pearls, of course, and a coat that probably cost more than my entire living room set. Her expression was tight, like it physically hurt her to be on this side of town. "Diane," she said, almost like a warning. I didn't invite her in. She didn't wait. She stepped in anyway, eyes scanning my small apartment with visible disdain. "I suppose this is cozy," she said. I crossed my arms. "What do you want, Beverly?" She sighed like it was all exhausting for her. "Nathan's in trouble. Financial. Something with the business. They overextended. There's debt. Legal threats. And now the bank's involved. Well, we're in a tight spot." I said nothing. She kept going. "Gary mentioned that your fundraiser did quite well. And with all the media coverage, we thought perhaps you'd be willing to help. Just until they're stable again. Mallory is very stressed." I almost laughed. Almost. "You want me to give money?" I asked slowly, not trusting my voice. She looked offended. "We thought you might be grateful for everything we've done. You and Evan wouldn't have made it without the family's name or support." "What support?" I asked. "The ignored voicemails? The fundraiser you refused to share? The wedding you all prioritized while my son fought for his life?" Her cheeks flushed. "That's unfair." "No, Beverly. What's unfair is asking me to help clean up a mess made by adults who didn't care when a child was dying." She opened her mouth. I raised a hand. "You made your choices. And so did I. Now it's your turn to live with them." I walked to the door and held it open. She stood still, mouth trembling, but no words came. Finally, she left. I closed the door behind her with a quiet click and exhaled. It didn't feel triumphant. It felt clean, like I'd finally swept out the last bit of dust from a house that no longer belonged to me. The divorce was finalized on a rainy morning. I didn't cry. I sat in the lawyer's office, signed the last document, shook Carla's hand, and walked back to my car. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was freedom written in ink. Later that week, Evan and I planted herbs in little pots on the windowsill: basil, mint, and rosemary. His hair was starting to grow back in soft patches, and he insisted that we name the plants like pets. He named the basil Jerry. "Why Jerry?" I asked. He shrugged. "Sounds funny, like a plant that doesn't listen." I laughed harder than I expected to, not because it was that funny, but because we were here, together, still laughing. One afternoon, I received a letter. Not from Gary, not from Beverly. It was from a woman in Michigan. She wrote that she'd followed Evan's story for months, quietly, and had recently left an abusive marriage because Diane's words had given her strength. "You reminded me that I'm allowed to say no," she wrote, "that I don't owe anyone my silence." I cried then. Quiet tears, the kind that don't hurt, just cleanse. Evan's follow-up appointment was clear. No signs of new growth. His numbers looked strong. We held hands all the way home, not speaking much, just breathing in the same air, just grateful. In the evenings, I started writing again. Not for a blog or fundraiser, just for me. I wrote down everything, what it felt like to be overlooked, to be used, to rise anyway. I wrote about Evan's strength. I wrote about the women like me who learned too late that silence doesn't earn love. It only makes your pain easier to ignore. And then, I wrote about the day I stopped being silent, about the day they came asking, and how I finally told them no, not out of vengeance, but because I was finally saying yes to myself.